are missing.
It's not the first one again, is it?
No, it's not the first one.
So I received some pretty substantial feedback regarding our session this morning.
Okay.
We need to start and end on time.
Right.
So that there were a lot of people who missed the volcano. They only caught the last 2 or 3 minutes because we moved the schedule.
Right.
It probably would have been better to just switch those first two in hindsight. We weren't thinking about it, but people
Well,
are
we actually
leaving other
wanted-
sessions to come to our session.
We actually wanted to. Really.
Yeah.
It was really difficult. It was complicated.
Yeah.
We wanted to, but the next set of people said there were 2 of them, and he didn't want to start immediately because the second person wasn't yet around. So that was complex. You understand? Yeah, and that still happened eventually, though.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the better thing would have been to start them at whether his partner was there or not. Just started him at the 15 after, and then the people who were late could have gone after the poster presenters as kind of a makeup or something.
Yeah. But I guess those who came would have still missed it.
No, the
those who were
the ones who are complaining are the ones who came for the technical talks that were all like 10 minutes out ahead of the schedule.
Right.
So we were 10 minutes ahead of schedule for all of
Right.
the rest of the cascading talks.
So for this updates, we are missing only
Okay, only the second one now. Thank you. What I meant is that if you were targeting a specific one, maybe the 5th one, then it would have come up and it would have happened before you came. Then you will still complete. Because that person would have spoken before you arrived. You were targeting just that one talk. Yeah,
But that's okay. I mean, people should target one talk so that they can hit
Yes,
3
yeah,
different
it's
sessions.
fine.
Our job is to make sure that we start
Yeah.
the talks on time and end them on time.
I'm just saying it won't have helped the person. Because if
Yeah,
I-
I don't.
if I
If
move the people up-
somebody's late and they don't
Well, that's
show
why-
up, then their talk is canceled.
Well, that's why I actually said
Yeah.
they come after the rest. If
Yeah.
there's time, if not, they will be the ones to
That's
be
right.
talked down.
That's right.
So it's a tough move.
Okay.
If you will end up with any notes, like highlights of things that you think came out of this,
Restart.
awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, just send them over to me and
Yeah.
integrate my. I tried to take one highlight from each talk.
Or maybe we ask. I think who is missing.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon. Sorry, if you haven't yet given your presentation, well, I think particularly they're looking for the person speaking on renewable energy. That's Mohammed. If Mohammed is here, please see them at the desk. Please see them at the desk. They don't have your- I think we can start.
1 minute.
1 minute to grab water if you want to. After that, the door will be locked.
Okay. So we can start.
Okay. Good to see.
You will introduce?
Okay. You ready? Yeah,
You
right.
go. I will write.
Okay, docs. I'm trying to find the right one. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'll start on the dot 2:30. So welcome to the session. And to kick us right in, remembering that people just had lunch, is Mr. Wang, or is it speaking on amplifying the impact of CTBTO data for emergency response and climate change monitoring.
Cool. Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Jessica Margolis, and we actually worked on this project together, so we will be presenting together. Thank you all for coming, and welcome to our presentation. To start, I'll talk a little bit about the origin of our project and some of our objectives. So in brainstorming for this project, we began by looking at natural connections between the CTBTO and SDGs, as this project was one of the SDG Innovation Challenge projects. And we focused on the fact that the IMS collects such advanced data on climate change phenomena and the impact it already has on monitoring natural disasters. And this prompted us to explore what kind of connections could be made between the IMS and emergency response, specifically for connections to SDG Goal 13, climate action. And we were wondering if the IMS is already informing emergency preparedness, like tsunami and earthquake monitoring, what else could it be doing for emergency response? So luckily for us, a focus on climate change monitoring and strengthening emergency response is one of the specific targets and few of the indicators for SDG 13, climate action. And you can see the specifics on this slide. Some of you may have seen our brief presentation on Tuesday, in which we spoke more in depth about these indicators and targets, so we'll skip that for now, but we're happy to answer any questions on these specifics later on. So to talk a little bit about some of our objectives and goals for this project, we began by exploring how to increase the profile and impact of the CTBTO's data, and also how unused sources of IMS data could improve existing systems outside of the IMS systems. And we realized that social media platforms could be coupled with climate change data to make IMS information more useful to policymakers. So we have 3 objectives for this project. The first is marrying long-term climate change to social media posts or personal multimedia in the news. And the goal here is to put a face to climate change, which should make the data more relatable and personable. The second is collaborating with national authorities in charge of emergency response to show how IMS data or other climate change monitoring can reinforce emergency response. And the third is leveraging unused sources of CTBTO data to improve what is currently available on non-IMS systems. And later on, we'll go into detail about how an example of this is how the CTBTO data could be used to enhance worldwide pollen monitoring.
So, sort of the underlying principle behind the platform that we're proposing is the climate attribution literature. So basically, climate attribution studies to what extent the strength and likelihood of extreme weather events, many of which are occurring already at lower intensity or frequencies before climate change. So to what extent these are attributable to climate change. And there are a few organizations in the world that publishes updated studies on this topic. And examples include the American Meteorological Society and Carbon Brief, which is a UK NGO. As you can see on the slide, this is a platform maintained by Carbon Brief, and it shows extreme weather events across the globe, and you can filter it depending on what kind of events you're interested in. And it links these specific events to scientific studies that basically shows, okay, to what extent is this event attributable to human-induced climate change? So that is sort of the underlying principle of our platform. And to go sort of more specifically, the idea here is to create a platform that puts a face to technical scientific data in order to demonstrate the immediacy of climate change. So we hope to do this by overlaying social media data over technical data. So the figure on your left is a sort of very rudimentary example of what this could look like. So the graph shows global ocean temperature anomalies, basically changes across time of global ocean temperatures. And this is something that the IMS system could measure based on hydroacoustic thermometry. And this could be overlaid with social media or news posts related to various extreme weather events that are linked to warming oceans. As you can see, we've put a couple examples there of hurricanes and flooding, which were attributed by the climate attribution literature to climate change. And then on the right, there's an example of what this platform could look like if this was upscaled via Tableau. We did not make this graph. This is the graph somebody else made, but it shows the functionality of the interactiveness of a platform such as Tableau, and also the sort of hover caption feature that is very integral to the platform, to our platform. And sort of delving deeper into the examples that we raised, just to give you a taste of what kind of extreme weather event that our platform can look into. The first example is rapid intensification. So rapid intensification is defined as an increase in wind speeds of 35 miles per hour or above in 24 hours. And some key ingredients for rapid intensification are high sea surface temperatures and excess ocean heat content, both of which are related to sea temperatures. And as you can see in this graph, recently there are a couple of hurricanes that hit the U.S. that were rapidly intensified, and this sort of shows the increase in magnitude and frequency of rapid intensification because of warming oceans. And hopefully, if we sort of overlay the social media data that shows the impact on a personal level of these storms and hurricanes onto the technical data of sea temperatures, we can really drive home the message of climate change impacts us on a personal level. The second example we sort of looked at was rising sea levels, which causes flooding. And rising ocean temperatures cause sea levels to rise through sort of two mechanisms. One, water expands when it gets hotter, and also melting ice caps. So, as alluded to a lot in other presentations in this conference, rising sea levels disproportionately impact areas of the world, especially the developing world, that do not really have the capacity to deal with such challenges. So again, with our platform, we hope to be able to capture this personal impact and put a face to the technical data that the IMS produces.
So now I'll talk a little bit about policy implications of our platform using Japan as an example. So to begin, to explain Twitter Alerts, which is one of the social media platforms we looked at that has emergency response options. Twitter Alerts is a program that allows select public agencies and emergency organizations to tweet up-to-date information relevant to unfolding events, such as public safety warnings or evacuation instructions during a crisis. So public agencies such as the Ctbt or emergency organizations could register to send Twitter alerts, which would allow them to notify populations of impending weather events and contribute to the organization of evacuations, for example. Additionally, information from Twitter could help member states identify where there are populations that are experiencing distress and that may need additional assistance during a crisis. So given the constraints of its mandate, we understand that the CTBTO itself may not be eligible to join this program, but it could encourage its member states to do so. So Japan is a useful example of the two main policy implications that this platform could have. And one of the main outcomes that could happen from coordinating IMS data with social media. So this is a heat map of Twitter use across Japan. And it highlights the very large amount of across the world, and it highlights the very large amount of Twitter use in Japan. And with such a large amount of Twitter users and such a large amount of seismic events that Japan experiences, it would be a natural candidate for this program. To talk more specifically, for an example, in the aftermath of the Daehuko earthquake and consequent leak at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, IMS data from seismic and hydroacoustic stations was used to track global radionuclide dispersal. issue tsunami warnings, and the radionuclide stations were used to track global radionuclide dispersal. So firstly, if the Japanese Meteorological Agency were part of this program and was using the platform, it could have used IMS tracking data to send out Twitter alerts and notify the public of the status of these disasters. And if this were done in the future, it could give the government enhanced access and ability to communicate with the public. And our platform would also give the public a free flow of information about disasters and how they might respond, such as where to evacuate. Secondly, and consequently, a national agency could use our proposed platform to create more flexible and responsive actions in the face of a disaster. For example, reviewing macro-level data that tracks natural disasters at the same time as real-time responses of individuals on the ground could help agencies better realize where emergency response efforts were not being delivered or what populations were still in need.
So the final section of our proposal looks at potential future uses of IMS data, and we decided to focus in on the pollen monitoring capability across the globe. So I guess the first obvious question is, is it technically possible for the IMS system? Is it technically possible for the IMS system to track pollen? And the answer is yes. The radionuclide filters used in IMS stations are trapping pollen already, so they can be used to monitor pollen. And then sort of the value add of the system is really captured in these two maps. So on the left, you can see sort of a heat map of global monitoring stations of pollen. And you can see most of it's concentrated in Europe, North America, and Japan. And the rest of the developing world is really not really that well covered. But if you look at the radionuclide station of the IMS, it's very much more equally dispersed across the world, and especially, if the IMS does start looking at the pollen that it traps, it can potentially really help plug a technical gap in global pollen monitoring capability. And then sort of finally, the impact of this was sort of twofold. First, better coverage will result in better alerts for people suffering from severe allergies. And secondly, because the length of the growing season of pollen is sort of related to climate and the temperature, there's also a new sort of additional indicator for climate change that the CTBTO can draw upon. So to conclude, our project covers the objectives of exploring cooperation with social media, creating a new platform that puts a face to technical climate change data, and explores additional uses of IMS data. These objectives will hopefully result in more nuanced climate change monitoring, more effective emergency response, and of course, greater achievement of SDG 13.
Thank you.
So we'll take one question. One question? Anybody?
Hello, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I was wondering, so in terms of the aspirations that you presented regarding the IMS, are there technical modifications, as in, are there potential associated expenses in order to make the functionalities come into reality? So basically, in order to make that pollen monitoring happen, are there things or monies that have to be paid in order for that to happen?
I mean, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that, well, obviously it's going to be additional costs, but no in the sense that the data is already there, right? Like radionuclide stations, as of right now, right? The filter already traps pollen. We just don't look at it. So yeah, yes and no.
So what are like what are the steps, concrete steps that need to be taken in order for that plan to be implemented?
From what we've heard in the process of doing research for this presentation, I think the biggest hurdle at the moment is more political than technical. I think member states have reservations about, have political reservations about implementing such measures.
Yeah, so like we mentioned this briefly, but because the CTBTO is a mission-driven organization that adheres to objectives by the member states, there would most likely need to be a desire and demand from member states to start using this data for pollen monitoring, for example.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. And talking to us about renewable energy, sorry, round of applause for. Thank you. So moving straight on, we have Ms. Mohammed talking about renewable energy and sustainable development.
Good afternoon. My name is Surarad Mohammed from Iraq. I work Iraqi National Monitoring Authority. My presentation talk about renewable energy and sustainable development in the context of environmental security. In this slide, headline my presentations. Oops. No, in this slides.
Well, to save time, I think they have to do that while they figure out what's wrong. They have to change for you while they figure out what's wrong.
This is my abstracts. This introduction. Sustainability development is a primary goals of the world because it has a role in protecting the environmental. And also it is possible to reduce to the negative effect on the environmental using nuclear plants. In the slide, research problem, as you increasing, as you in the slide, increasing need for clean energy because to achieve the SD. SD, this means sustainability development. Importance of the research. Headline the role of the importance of renewable energy and the role of verifications regime for the Ctbt and to support the peaceful use of nuclear technology in achieving the goals of sustainable development. And increasing the demand for energy to achieve the development goals while reducing the use of traditional energy without harming the environmental is to provide environmental security to achieve sustainability development, and this what we see. Sensibility development. In this slide, what is sensibility development? It is important to know what is the mean. Sensibility development is a comprehensive concept to meet the need of people at the present time and to improve their life conditions without compromising the ability of the future generation to achieving their goals. Renewable energy. This is clean energy and fundamental achieving sustainability development. And the role of renewable energy. Renewable energy play important role in the achievement of SnT. The use of this type of energy is reflected in the 3 dimensions of sensibility development, namely on economic dimensions, social dimensions, and environmental dimensions. The role of renewable energy contributes to the eradication of poverty, saving life, improving healthy, rising the standard of life, they helping to meet basic human needs. In this slide, environmental challenges of a nuclear plant. The nuclear plants, the world face a range of the environmental challenge. Some of these we will discuss in the next slides. The first challenges, health effect of radiations. It has no radiations effect on the environmental. Nuclear plants operate under regulatory monitoring, verifications, and inspections aspect to ensure safe performance. The second challenges, global warming and climate change. Nuclear plants are characterized by the fact that they do not emit carbon dioxide, the main cause of global warming effect, so it is cleaning and uncontaminated. The third challenge is risk of nuclear waste. The disposal of radioactive waste, it is necessary to provide adequate storage space for long periods of time without affecting the environmental. And the fourth challenges, thermal pollutions. Thermal pollutions, as a study on the thermal effect of cooling water on the marine environment in Taiwan have shown that there is no effect of cooling water on the marine environment. A study on the Keja station in Taiwan from the station confirmed the marine environment around it. Security challenges of nuclear plants. Existing nuclear plants under construction or planning phase are a range of security challenges, some of which will be discussed, such as energy security, site security, public acceptance. It's energy security. And the second security challenges, site and public acceptance. The establishment and operation of physical protection system are a great interest at the national and international levels, and the state has full responsibility for the establishment and the operation of physical protection system for nuclear material and installations. The fourth of security challenges, non-proliferation issue. Nuclear plants do not pose the risk of proliferation. The last slide, the role of verification system in sensibility development. Ctbt verification system are designed that detect any nuclear explosion that occur on Earth, underground, underwater, or in the atmosphere. The purpose, the verification system is to monitor compliance by countries with the comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, by country with comprehensive Ctbt, which prohibits all the nuclear explosion on the plant. This means that the verification system play a role in protecting the environmental from pollution by explosion and results toxic gases and polluted on the ground or underground effect. The population or remains of underwater explosion effect, the aquatic environmental, etc. And so we protect the plant as much as possible. Thank you.
Great. While she waits, we'll take 2 eager questions. Questions? She already preempted you and answered everything. Going, okay, great. Yes.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation. Have you compared the relative risks from the perspective of long-term environmental risks from nuclear fuel, spent fuel, and the security risks from dual-use technologies like reprocessing or enrichment, to the security issues relating to the use of solar power? Of course, in the Middle East, where you're from, the sun shines brightly all day, and I'm just interested in whether you have looked at the comparison of those possible sustainable energy sources.
I compare by security challenges and environmental challenges. The environmental challenges of about 4th or 5th challenges, but security 3 challenges. But sorry, specific that's equations is not compare between this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we're fine. So now We should be hearing about the worst environmental disaster in Brazil. And to tell us is Mr. Neri. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brandon Lee, and I'm from Seismological Observatory Department of the University of Brasilia, in Brazil. And this presentation is about the failure of the iron ore tailing dam, the worst environmental disaster in Brazilian history. This is a case study using infrasound technology and the signals made by the failure of the tailing dam. And I would like to thank Ctbt for this conference and all workshops. So, first, I will talk about the Mauryan disaster that happened in 2015. Then I will talk about the similar case in Brumadinho. This occurred in this year. And I'll be also presenting how the Seismological Observatory has monitored these events with respect to the IMS stations, seismic and infrasound stations. And finally, we'll show the conclusions. So, the Mauryan disaster occurred on 5th November 2015, on around 3 p.m., and about 60 million cubic meters of the iron waste flowed into the Doce River, causing toxic brown mud to pollute the river and the beaches near the mouth of the river. It reached the Atlantic Ocean 17 days later and killed 19 people. And this is the first disaster, and 3 years later, another disaster had failure. So this case is about the Brumadinho. It was around 12:30 a.m. local time on 25th January 2015. This dam broke. It was transformed into a mud tsunami. And the dam broke. It was transformed into a mud tsunami and destroying everything. As you can see on the video, the fast reduction of the soil is stored in the top part, and after the wall broke, the dam went down, causing a mud tsunami, and destroying everything, the forest and the cafeteria, where many people were having lunch. And this disaster and the Mauryan disaster has described as the worst environmental disaster in Brazilian history. And we can't calculate the environmental damage because the pollution, the toxic brown, polluted everything. So the main question is, why did this happen? Why did this happen? So when colonial masters came to Brazil, they wanted to explore raw material. They extract raw material, and they started mining since the 17th century. So this activity, the mining activity, was responsible for occupying the interior of Brazil. And nowadays, Brazil exports a lot of mineral resources, and we can find mines in most parts of the country. And this activity is responsible for 5% of Brazilian GDP. It's really important for Brazilian economy. And a lot of cities are growing around the mines. This is a typical example from Paracatu. The mine is larger than the city, and the mine activity was responsible for employing around 41,000 people directly and around 300 people indirectly. This is an important economy for the economy. And we can monitor the mine activity with seismology and infrasound technology. In Brazil, there is one seismic network with 90 stations, and there are three seismographic stations from IMS, one primary on BDFB and two auxiliary, and there is one infrasound array. Here, there is one seismometer to 24 hours of data, and we can see around 20 mine blasts in this part, because these stations is close to the mine, and there are more explosions than earthquakes in Brazil. The mine activity, we can monitor the mine activity with with infrasound technology too. Here there is two examples. One for local mining blasts, there is two explosions from the mine about 15 kilometers from the station, the ionizing array. And here there is one example from the Mariana mine blast. And it's about the 211 kilometers. Look at how high frequencies reduced at the further distance. And most part of the infrasound signals detected by the ionizing array is from the sources located at the close to the surface of the Earth. And here there is the main azimuths from the mines. Okay. Now let's talk about the failure of the tailing dam. Here there is the cafeteria where many people were having lunch, the office, and here there is the dam, the failure, the tailing dam. This is the after. It's catastrophic. So the seismology can detect the two explosions, one before and another after the failure of the tailing dam. But, however, the explosion has low magnitude and was too far to be correlated than the failure of the tailing dam. And we can see the mud flow noise made by the failure of the tailing dam. It's about 5 minutes. And looking for the signals, infrasound signals, using NDC in a box, using the software DKT GPMCC, when we know when it happened, when we know where it happened, and we know the sound velocity, we can calculate where the waves will arrive at the ionizing station. And it was about, in calculation, it was about 12:68 p.m. It's UTC time. But the azimuth calculation was wrong because it was 268 degrees and the dam was 145 degrees. And we can't correlate this family, GPMCC family, with the failure of the tailing dam. And the ionizing station couldn't detect this event. So the mine activity is really important to Brazilian economy. And the government is applying public policies for tailing dams risks, like continuous monitoring. And the seismology and infrasound technology can detect these events. But the main question is, why the ionizing stations couldn't detect this event? So, the Brumadinho Dam was 87 meters high. And look at the video, we can see the negative pulse, and the movement was a mix for vertical and horizontal event. But predominantly is horizontal event. And there is one hill between the dam and the station. And it's about 650 kilometers from the dam to the station. And mixing these challenges reduces the signals to be arrived to the stations. If we installed more infrasound stations, probably we could detect this signal generated by the failure of the tailing dam. Well, I think this is it. And I would like to thank you to stay here. And I'm ready for the questions.
I was waiting for that. More hands, please. Let's see where we're going. How many people have questions? For him, only one. Okay, please go on, sir.
Thank you.
Welcome.
First of all, I would like to know, you don't mention the name of the company.
Yes.
You see, the CTBTO is a transparent system.
All right.
All the information are scrutinized, reviewed, and then made public.
All right.
35 years ago, one of the largest environmental disasters was in India, was committed by the Union Carbide Company. It was written all the time. So I think you should mention next time the name of the company which was responsible for the two environmental disasters. Second, when you conclude that seismology could forecast or help in mining tailings, I wonder how it would be possible, because seismology can last a few minutes, maybe a few minutes before it happened. There is no time for help or change things in a few minutes. Thank you.
Yes. The name of the company is the Mauryan Disaster. The company was the San Marco. And the Brumadinho is the biggest company, the mine in Brasília, the Vale do Rio Doce. And this project is about the potential sources of infrasound, the failure of the tailing dam. It's like an avalanche or landslide, but it's not avalanche or landslide. It's a failure of the tailing dam. And I can't find on the bibliography for this. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? No, all right, great. Thank you very much.
So we will move to the next presentation by the Gautam, Ms. Gautam. So the CTBTO and Goal 11, using the IDC to make cities safer and more inclusive through disaster preparedness law.
Thank you. My name is Brenna Gautam, and this is Natalia Jarina. We're both members of the CTBTO youth group, and we're presenting as part of the CTBTO times SDG challenge. So in this presentation, Natalia will talk about threats to cities. Sustainable Development Goal number 11. The purpose is making cities and human settlements more inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So she'll discuss some of the threats facing cities, and then I'll talk some about ways that CTBTO data can be used to improve the safety of cities.
Thank you, Brenna. So many cities around the world are facing acute challenges in managing rapid urbanization, from ensuring adequate housing and infrastructure to support growing populations, to confronting the environmental impact of urban sprawl, to reducing vulnerability to disasters. From 1990 to 2013, almost 90% of deaths attributed to internationally reported disasters occurred in low and low-income countries. Reported damage to housing attributed to disasters shows a statistically significant rise from 1990 onwards. Low-income households and small businesses are affected more frequently than middle and high-income households. This is a result of high exposure to hazards, vulnerable conditions, and lower coping capacity. To save lives, to prevent and reduce losses, and strengthen the resilience of cities, it is essential to promote public and private investments that take disaster risk reduction into consideration. Many countries have developed measures to reduce disaster risk in vulnerable urban areas, including investments in drainage infrastructure in flood-prone areas, risk-informed urban and land use planning, and appropriate building codes and other regulations. Disasters have a devastating impact on development. Families lose homes, livelihoods, and loved ones. Communities lose businesses, jobs, and services. Children, and particularly girls, miss school and are at risk of early marriage. And the list of impacts goes on. Disasters also can cancel progress on poverty reduction. This was certainly the experience in the Philippines, struck in 2009 by tropic storm Ondoy and typhoon Piping. Rizal, one of the provinces hit hardest, saw the poverty incidence almost double from 5.5% in 2006 to 9.5% in 2009. And 6 years later, the recovery was still far off, with only 7.6% of families still below poverty line. And whilst all countries suffer disasters, they have the greatest impact on poor countries. For instance, 86% of deaths from flooding occur in low and middle income countries compared to 10% in upper middle and 4% in high income countries. And whilst absolute financial losses are higher in developed countries, they take a deeper toll in developing countries. The East Japan earthquake in 2011 was one of the most expensive disasters in history, costing around $200 billion, which is equivalent to 3% of Japan's GDP. And the earthquake in Haiti in 2011 is estimated to have cost $14 billion, which is equivalent to 160% of Haiti's GDP. At the city level, especially vulnerable populations living in slums are disproportionately affected by disasters. Slums are defined by the UN as a group of individuals living under the same roof in an urban area who lack one or more of the following: durable housing of a permanent nature that protects against extreme climate conditions, sufficient living space, with which means not more than 3 people sharing the same room, easy access to safe water in sufficient amounts at an affordable price, access to adequate sanitation in the form of a private or public toilet shared by a reasonable number of people, and security of tenure that prevents forced evictions. So, over the last 15 years, the number of people living in slums has actually increased from 807 million to 883 million. And the majority of those living in slums are located in 3 regions. It's Eastern and Southeastern Asia, Central and Southern Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And when disaster risk reduction efforts do not consider those populations living in slums, these people face heightened losses from poorly constructed dwellings, bad roads and crowded conditions blocking access to rescue, and health crisis spreading in the wake of disasters. Disaster risk reduction measures are proven to be both highly effective and highly cost-effective. The cyclone Phailin, which hit the Indian state of Odisha in 2013, provided a clear example of successful disaster risk reduction. 12 million people were affected, nearly 1 million people were evacuated, and there were 27 casualties. So the small number of deaths is actually a testament to good government planning and response. And other countries that prioritize disaster management have achieved similar impressive results. Casualties in Bangladesh, for instance, have been reduced greatly by an effective early warning system, coastal protection, raising awareness at community level, and others. And it is no secret that reducing the risk of disasters is cost-effective too. Many studies have shown that appropriate prevention pays. For example, improving weather forecasting and public communication system to provide early warning of disasters in developing countries could yield benefits from 4 to 36 times greater than the cost. Studies of flood defenses in India and Samoa found that people-centered interventions such as forest storages, flood shelters, and others were better value for money than costly embankments.
So as Natalia has demonstrated, effective and equitable disaster risk reduction is key to achieving SDG number 11 and ensuring that cities are kept safe, resilient, and also inclusive. So now we would like to move into considering some of the following questions. What role can the CTBTO play in helping achieve the fruition of this goal? How can IMS data specifically help inform disaster risk reduction efforts? And how may it be leveraged to improve conditions in the slums? So in seeking to answer some of these questions, we focused our attention on the role of international cooperative agreements, which have been very successful, national early warning laws, and also local building regulations in disaster risk reduction. So first, cooperative disaster warning agreements entered into with the CTBTO can be used directly to promote SDG 11, and the link here is fairly clear. Already, the CTBTO has entered into tsunami warning agreements with 16 different countries, including my own country, the United States. And many of these countries have already started using data for seismic hazard mapping purposes, which can in turn be used to inform building codes for construction projects. Further expansion of IMS data sharing would allow more states, especially those at-risk vulnerable states that Natalia mentioned, both to protect their own citizens and also to further engagement with the CTBTO. Although tsunami warning agreements have thus far been the most common and they're a very exciting first step, the CTBTO's monitoring data has a number of possible risk reduction uses aside from just tsunamis, including earthquakes, volcanoes, atmospheric incidents, etc. So operating at near real time and coming from a wide range of different sources, a diverse array of locations, there are many benefits to using CTBTO data compared to national monitoring systems. Granted, there are some concerns about sharing IMS data for expanded disaster risk reduction purposes. For example, some have advocated for a more narrow reading of the treaty text, which obliges the Secretariat to make available data to all state parties. So by reading the phrase "to all state parties" narrowly, that could be construed to mean only to state parties and not to other states, obviously. However, in the past, member states have not opposed the release of IMS data for this limited humanitarian tsunami warning purpose, understanding that the recipients will be clearly defined. So applying this data to other disasters would allow countries to incorporate the information, apply it at the city level, and thus better protect their human settlements. Aside from cooperative agreements with the CTBTO is steps countries can take in amending or enacting their own early warning system legislation. By doing these amendments and enacting these provisions, they can include language on cooperation and information sharing with international bodies. Even without binding language, as you might find in an agreement or a treaty, even aspirational language within national laws that discuss information sharing at a global level, this can be used to normalize global approaches to information sharing in disaster risk reduction, and it can promote a culture of sharing and sort of strengthen a soft law framework. So I left off the key to this, but a survey was conducted of several different countries to see what the current situation is with their early warning system laws or policies, and whether they include provisions on international cooperation. So the dark blue fields on that far column indicate that they have provisions on international cooperation, whereas the light blue means that they do not. As you can see, the early warning system laws vary across countries. Many are hazard-specific, while some are regulated by general law. But provisions on international cooperation are not consistent throughout, and in fact, it's in the minority of countries that have this. However, I did just want to stress a few countries that I think have very beneficial provisions. China's emergency response law includes language on cooperation and exchange with other governments, in emergency prevention, in risk reduction, and even in rehabilitation. And finally, the role of the CTBTO in protecting slums from disaster through data sharing. This is an exciting application of data. It can be used for seismic hazard mapping, which in turn can help inform building codes for construction projects, for zoning regulations, and for urban planning in a way that protects the most vulnerable within cities. There have been rapid advancements in modeling and mapping technologies for seismic microzonation. So now hazardous events can be charted very accurately in terms of the frequency and intensity and location. And this is in combination with advancements being made in the visual representations of slum mapping, which is demonstrated in the slide above. So to conclude, these steps together can help improve the safety and the resiliency of cities in furtherance of SDG number 11. And yeah, that is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will ask the floor for question.
Actually, we can't take any questions. Sorry. Because we have to.
No, if they
Oh,
have
sorry,
question,
we can take a question, sorry.
Yep.
That was a really great presentation. Thank you. I also need to go as well with you. But really quickly, what was the most surprising thing that you learned in your research? Or interesting?
I was mostly interested in actually the applications to slums and to those kind of very vulnerable dwellings. I just wasn't familiar with all the different risks that they faced. So that was probably the most interesting to me.
well, for me, this was really impressive to know how actually disasters affect developing countries in compared to developed countries. Because this story about the East Japan earthquake that cost like $200 billion and was only like equivalent to 3% of Japan's GDP, and earthquake in Haiti, which is estimated to have cost $14 billion, which is like less, but it is equivalent to 160% of Haiti's GDP. This was really impressive, and it really like it touched me. So it was very interesting to work on this project with this wonderful girl.
Thank you. Any other question, please?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about your presentation. I think that's great that you put all together the needs, what's done, or what each country is adopting. There's also a World Bank and United Nations Development Program efforts to address this hazard and risk assessment. So I was going to suggest or find out if you had any connection with those programs and sort of coordinated with them.
Yes, for my part, I did rely a lot on United Nations data, actually, because they've done a great job, and they even have done a lot of this sort of legislative surveys on their own and tried to strengthen it at a governance level. So the UN was actually a big resource that we relied on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also took a lot of data from Sustainable Development Goals report of 2018 from the UN, so yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we will move to the last presentation of our session by Öcal Nekmioglu, The Invisible Link Between the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and CDBDO.
Thank you very much, Francois, and thank you very much, dear colleagues. A lot has been said on this topic during this week, so I hope that there wouldn't be any too much repetition, and I'd like to thank especially to the previous speakers who made, in my point of view, a great introduction to what I'm going to talk, namely the invisible link, which is probably not that invisible anymore to this community. As Mr. Menda from the UNISDR office mentioned also yesterday, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 and 30 was adopted in 2015, and it is a follow-up of the Hyogo Framework for Action on the building the resilience of nations and communities to disasters. It has 7 targets. The first one is to reduce global disaster mortality. Second one, reduce the number of affected people globally, reduce the direct disaster economic loss, reduction of the disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services, increase in the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies, enhancing of international cooperation to developing countries, and increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information and assessment to people. So, what do we talk actually when we talk about natural disaster risk reduction? We talk about global inequality. That's one thing, the main thing that we talk about. Some slides that I'll follow up now is coming from the UNISDR report, which indicates that during 1998-2017, disaster-hit countries reported direct economic losses valued around $3 billion, of which the climate-related value was around 77%. This sums up to 68% of losses reported in comparison to previous reporting period. And overall, the reported losses from extreme weather events rose by 251% in the 20-year period. In absolute monetary terms, over the last 20 years, as an example, the USA recorded the biggest losses, around $1 trillion, reflecting high asset values as well as frequent events. China, in comparison, suffered a significantly higher number of events, whereas lower value in terms of economic value, close to $500 billion. Now, such losses are only a part of the story, since the majority of disaster reports contain no economic data. The World Bank has calculated that the real cost to the global economy is staggering per year $500 billion, with disasters pushing 26 million people into poverty every year. Absolute losses also mask the relatively greater burden of disasters of the poor. When economic costs are expressed as an average of the GDP, this becomes clear. Only one high-income territory, Puerto Rico, ranked among the top 10 in terms of percentage of GDP losses over the past 20 years. Apart from the upper middle income Cuba, the other worst hit nations were all lower income countries, led by Haiti, as indicated also during the previous speakers. Looking at the number of disasters during that period, climate-related disasters dominate the scene. And the type of the disasters, 45% approximately are floods, 28% storms, earthquake follows by around 8%, and then the rest follows. In terms of the economic impact, 45% of the damage or the financial damage comes from the floods. This is then followed with 33% in drought, 16% with storms, and then the earthquake constitutes 3%. And the number of casualties, when we look at it, then it's 56% are due to earthquakes. And looking at the reported economic losses per year with major events highlighted during the last 10 years, you will see that is in 2005, hurricanes Katrina, Rita, United States, Central America, Caribbean. Then the Sichuan earthquake in 2008 in China, the Tohoku earthquake, tsunami 2011, and then hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria in 2017. Surprisingly, right, as the previous speaker also indicated, the Sumatra event is not listed here because it's not that costly. What is the value of 250,000 people? How can we calculate that? There are certain things that we need to probably improve in our statistics. Inequality is even greater than available losses data suggests because of the systematic underreporting by low-income countries. So while the high-income countries reported losses from 53% of disasters between 1998 and 2017, low-income countries only reported 13%. So there is no data available from them. A similar divergence is evident geographically. Oceania recorded losses from 51% of climate-related disasters, whereas in Africa, this is 14%. So in the low-income countries, there is no reporting on such values. For disasters since 2000, In low-income countries, around 130 people died per million living in disaster-affected areas, compared to just 18 in high-income countries. That means people exposed to natural hazards in the poorest nations were more than 7 times more likely to die than equivalent populations in the richest nations. A similar pattern of the deep inequality is revealed by the georeference ratios of people affected, not killed necessarily, by disasters. While the largest absolute numbers of people affected by disasters lived in upper middle income countries, by far the highest number per 100 inhabitants lived in low-income countries. Again, the contrast is sharp between the low-income countries, 7.8%, and high-income countries, 1.3%, indicating that people in poorest countries were on average 6 times more likely to be injured, to lose their home, be displaced or evacuated, or require emergency assistance. So what kind of a world do we live now today when I hear about the youth talking about the times of internet, Twitter, and social media? So encouraging, but this is the fact. 2.1 billion people around the globe globally lack safe water at home. 844 million do not have basic drinking water services. 263 million people spend more than 30 minutes per round trip collecting water. 4.5 billion people globally have no toilets at home that safely manage excreta. 2.3 billion still do not have basic sanitation services. Almost 900 million people defecate in the open, and 600 million people share a toilet. This is the global picture. This is the world that we live in today, and we should never forget that picture. So I'd like to move to the evolution of the use of Ctbt data for civil and scientific purposes. At the time of 2004 Sumatra event, some of you may remember, there was really harsh criticism to the organization by not making its data available to the scientific community for civil and scientific purposes. And the Sumatra event was actually a cornerstone. In 2011, during the Tohoku event, Ctbt demonstrated its vast capabilities and improvements in the service to the civil and scientific society, in many aspects probably supplementing the work of the International Atomic Energy Agency, providing critical information on the radiation propagation. Still, despite all these positive improvements, we still sometimes hear at the policy level making that what is the use of civil and scientific data, whether it is included in the mandate of the treaty and the organization, etc. So do we have to wait for the next big event until we then again realize its importance? And I'd like to move on something that was expressed also today morning on the Apocalypse Krakatoa 1883. Just remember, the initial blast of the 1883 Krakatoa eruption sent a cloud of gas and debris on an estimated up to 80 kilometers into the air. Pyroclastic flows up to 40 kilometers with a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. Tsunami up to 30 meters. The eruption is estimated to have had an explosive force of 200 megatons. It's estimated that more than 36,000 people died. The explosion released an estimated 45 cubic kilometer of debris into the atmosphere, darkening the sky up to 450 kilometers from the volcano. Within 13 days, a layer of sulfur dioxide and other gases began to filter the amount of sunlight able to reach the Earth. Average global temperatures were as much as 1.2 degrees cooler for the next 5 years. So what happens if we have that event today? What kind of a situation we'll be facing with? So I'd like to move to a mechanism that is able to or willing to address the natural disasters globally, and that is the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism. It is the mechanism under the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations in order to be able to assist not only its member states, but globally for those in need after a natural disaster. But to be able to do that, they need to make an assessment of a situation. When something happens around the globe, they need to be able to identify whether humanitarian aid at the global level is needed. And therefore, a group of organizations at the European level, which some of them are national data centers, came together and start providing an operational service to the European Commission, which is called Aristotle European Nature Hazard Scientific Partnership. It provides a flexible and scalable 24/7 multi-hazard service for the European Commission's Emergency Response Coordination Center, on natural hazards, on earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, severe weather complications, and floods. It has an operational system that is activated by the ERCC upon request, where the expert assessment, scientist assessment, is delivered within 3 hours, or there are some regular weekly reportings. And of course, research and science is a natural part of this process. Some examples of the weekly monitoring reports that are delivered to the European Union Commission, but some examples on the events. This could be an earthquake, this could be a volcanic eruption, this could be a tropical cyclone, and these are not limited to one page. But the most important part, apparently, is the very executive summary at the top. But even that is not enough, because, to simplify a little bit, the decision maker wants to have a simple output from a very complicated scientific phenomena. This is also what we face sometimes at the CTBT. When there's a nuclear event or nuclear test, despite all the reports and available information, at the end of the day, diplomats gather in a big room where the experts stand up and explain the situation in plain terms so the decision can be made. And this is exactly the biggest challenge at the same time. But the challenge poses an opportunity too, because it also tells us how the scientists can improve and communicate better the decision maker, what kind of influence we can have. So in that sense, I think the invisible link between the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and the CTBT is the civil and scientific use of both data and expertise. We always refer to data, but without having an expert judgment, expert capability to make use of the data itself is not that useful. Two targets of the Sendai framework. One is the substantial enhancement of the international cooperation to developing countries, and the other one is increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information. CTBTO, through its interaction with the national data centers around the globe, is actually, through also making use of civil and scientific use of its data, is actually building a capacity building program so that experts in low-income countries, developing countries, can actually increase their capabilities in order to be able to help their own problems. This is a daily problem for them, not necessarily always the nuclear threat. Because when you look at the Annex 2, it's 44 states. These are considered to be the critical elements for entry into force. But from them, you would see that 14 states actually are in possession of nuclear weapons. These are the 5 NPT, 3 outside the NPT, 1 in the middle is presumably having a nuclear weapon, and then 5 under the NATO umbrella that have the access to the shared weapon. So we're talking about 14 states at the end of the day, and the remaining 30 is considered to be at one stage might be capable of, not necessarily willing to have a nuclear weapon. What about the remaining 152 states? That is within this society, that is in this community, working towards the goal that is to all our benefit. In their daily life, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, severe weather-related events, posing a problem already in a situation where being alive on a daily basis is actually a natural disaster. When you don't have access to water, when you don't have access to the basic needs of a human being, actually the struggle to survival is actually a natural disaster. So by promoting the civil and scientific applications of the verification technologies, I humbly think that the CTBTO will optimize its capacity building program to ensure the sustainability of the national data centers of non-nuclear weapon state signatories. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles, for your comprehensive presentation. I will open the floor for questions, please.
Ujjal, my question is, in CTBTO, are there any attempts for more, so you laid out a problem, say earthquake hazard, let's say. Are there any attempts for helping countries with their hazard assessment or hazard-related problems? Are you aware of that? Any initiative about that?
I'm personally not aware of that, but Tammy will probably be in a better position to respond. I don't think that is a direct link But
Yeah, I don't see a direct link either.
No. And if I can partly respond also about hazard assessment and warning, early warning, there are also different steps and different strategies. So, for example, for the tsunami warning, there are many places in the world that were not impacted by any tsunami during the last millennium and so on. And for example, the Sumatra event that is obvious for everybody, nobody could predict such events. So when we implement the role of CTBTO, in my mind, is providing the data that can help about the earthquake first warning. We expect in the next future to monitor also volcanic activities, eruption, and so on, and tsunami generated by those geohazard. So this is a major issue, but I agree with you that going to the hazard and not to the warning system is also one brick missing, but these data are not enough to provide such results. Any other question, please?
Yeah, thank you for the very exhaustive presentation, but my question, maybe if you can comment on that. I mean, your focus is low-income countries, building capacity there, but people in low-income countries or scientists there are struggling to maintain capacity and even to maintain themselves. I mean, it's really very difficult environment, let alone establishing themselves there and communicating hazard to government and society. So what scenario would you suggest to build capacity and sustain it in developing countries?
that will definitely exceed my capacity. But I could say that, at least from the CTBTO point of view, since there is an established link towards NDCs, we can make use, the international community can make use of that link by allowing the experts, supporting the experts through the NDC activities, but also allowing them and supporting them in their capacity building in other natural hazard-related fields. That would be my only conclusion for the topic of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question?
Yeah, so he may have kind of touched on this with his question, but I was just wondering if in your research you came across what the large obstacles were to underreporting in developing nations and what you saw as like the biggest obstacles to reporting.
The biggest obstacle I experience in my professional life, I don't know whether it is limited to developing or non-developing countries, but I assume that there's a difference, is the communication of the scientific knowledge to the decision maker. I do think that there's probably different levels of complexities where highly developed countries probably have better practices, best practices of science and technology embedded already, and there's a culture of close cooperation. Whereas in the lesser developed countries, maybe this is something that we need to work on. But the biggest problem, I believe, is that at the time of the critical moment of decision making, how can I extract the knowledge I have accumulated within the last 20 years to someone that doesn't even know the terminology? That's the most important challenge in my point of view. Thanks.
Thank you. Last question? No? So, thank you. And thank you for all presenters. Now I invite you to go to the poster session. There will be all the different posters related to that session.
Thank you so much. If you have any notes that you can give me, greatly appreciate it, and then I'll submit them on our behalf.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Thank you. Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you.
So, should I give you that? Fine. And you? Fantastic.
So you can send to me, and then I will complete.
Okay.
The work was well.
Thank you. We try. We succeed. Okay.
Oh.
We-
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry?
Your session is over. Your time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. Really? Already?
Okay, we still not till 4:30. Let me quickly write something else, and then I send that to you.
Yeah, so the last presentation from Russia was also important. So I
Right.
to add some about the roles of Ctbt capacity building. And I will add some. Okay, what is the next? Is there any coffee break is one thing. Scientific session. Okay, okay. Okay. Good work.
Thank you, sir.
Hop là. Okay, we will stay tomorrow.
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Briefly, yeah. Well, this afternoon. So I'll be here tomorrow.
Rose. session and I will finish the report later.
To send it to you now.
Finish before 8 p.m.
I'm sending it to you now.
No, for me it would be so easy to do in French. But you know, the English for me is my fourth language.
Fourth?
German, because I born close to Germany. My parents spoke Alsatic, and then Spanish. And English, I just came to English when I was 35 years.
So you're pretty.
That's many things come in other language sometimes.
You're greedy, Francois. That's why. You are knowing too many languages.
I would prefer.
And that is the
writing.
problem you get when you have too many. It's like somebody with too many shoes. He wakes up, he doesn't know which one to wear.
You mix.
Yeah, but if he has only two, it's not
One
difficult.
red,
Or
one
just
blue.
it's not difficult. But the man who
No,
has
but
30 pairs of shoes or 30 shirts, he looks and says, what do I wear? Oh.
no, one thing is understanding, one thing is reading, and writing is the worst.
Okay, so if you also want to send back,
Yeah,
where you compile
yeah,
everything.
so you can
Yes, and then look at it, the
Yeah,
writing,
yes, to the-
and then I can forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
So English, some English strange words. If you don't understand what I written,
Yes.
check, please.
So how come it's not German that you think of?
Hmm?
Why is it not German? Why are you not thinking of in German? Why is
German?
it French? Yes.
French is my first language.
No, because you were born.
No, close to German. And my parents spoke to me in French. I learned French, but they spoke together in German.
Okay. Because I was wondering why
So
not German?
no. The first language is French. But then, but it's true that I have sometime put the words in the German logical.
Okay.
So the adjective is the other. You have to drop.
Wow.
Wow, it's nice. Okay.
Yeah, I've sent it to you now.
Yeah.
Already.
Good.
Yes.
So, see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Really nice working with you.
Thanks. Next time again?
Okay.
In 2 years?
In 2 years. I need to reply a mail quickly at the office.
Yeah.
Yes. Some
I will
reference.
be here in 2 years, sure. After, I don't know. Maybe I will be retired.
The meeting is always in Vienna. It's my first time of coming.
Are you?
Yeah, it's my first time. Never been there. And I never did any work with Ctbt.
No?
So it's my first time.
Ah, good. Have to come back.
Yeah, it will be nice. It will be nice. I like it.
No, it's a group. There are many because it's coordination, collaboration is yeah. Our experience, because we implemented station in various countries, not only in French territories, in Bolivia, in Indonesia, in Mongolia, etc. And this cooperation is very interesting. Yeah. Training there, implementing station in the field. And so on. And it's true that capacity building part is one very important. Okay. See
All
you.
right. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Oops. Thank you. I took my.
want it?
You can take it so that you know you're fine and clear.
Nice. Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's my computer. It just was misbehaving. So I said maybe it saw you coming and it was. I can be Malovito. Yes, thank you.
Just take a photo. Thank you.
So you know Andrei Belyashov is now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Belishov,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Andrei,
Yeah.
from
He used to work in Kazakhstan. It's in Russia, I think.
right now in Novosibirsk, yes, he changed.
Because we work together on some OSI issues, on-site inspection
Mhm.
related, active seismics and this stuff.
He's very clever.
Yeah.
And he has very famous mother.
Yeah. You need.
So waiting 5 minutes.
Yeah, still. We said in 3 minutes. Okay.
3 minutes. The people
We can start on time. It's okay. They will come
only
in. They're drinking
moving.
coffee. Drinking coffee.
As yesterday also at the beginning there was not
many,
people, but
Okay.
10, 15 minutes
Yeah.
call was.
We can wait. We can wait 1 or 2 minutes. Yesterday we waited 15 minutes because
Yes.
one of the talks was withdrawn. They didn't have the. They didn't present, so they had time. They had 15 minutes.
Yesterday the conveners absent.
Really?
The people
Okay.
sitting, but this table it was empty. And after 15
It's
minutes,
very
Maybe
unusual.
someone from the audience decided to.
today is vice versa.
There are a few people already. can go, yeah. Good afternoon, and welcome to the session on characterization of treaty-relevant events. We have a very nice variety of topics this afternoon, going from infrasound to radionuclide, to OSI, on-site inspection, and to advanced seismology. So, and the first talk is about the infrasound records associated with the Western Yunnan fireball of October 4th, 2017. And this is given by Wei Su.
Good afternoon. I'm Su Wei from Institute of Geophysics, China Earthquake Administration. My present title is infrasound record associated with the worst of Yunnan fireball on October 4th, 2017. The outline of present is a data source and the data analysis to infrasound array and lost conclusion. This video ensures the fire, the fall of fire in the The second, the data source from the GPL fireball's report. This report provides 7 key information of the fireball, including location, energy, and the date and the time. The second source is an infrasound station of TC and I6 MS station. Infrasonic signal of the fireball were observed by TC infrasound station is located the west of Yunnan province, and I6 station is MS station is east of Yunnan province. The distance between the stations and from the hypersize source are 314 kilometers and 450 kilometers respectively. This is a layout of TC station. It consists of 4 MB 2005 microparameter. This is a layout and the I6 station. It consists of 8 MB 2005 microparameter. The data analysis of 2 infrasound array. The PMCC and method was used to estimate acoustic wave parameter at 2 infrasound array. The PMCC provided by CEA does. And the I6 station data and from the China NDC. We estimate the energy from the period and use the following para forum and Rebelli in 1997. This is a result of a PMCC analysis of a TC array. We obtain of azimuth and speed and amplitude. This is a result of PMCC analysis MS station, I6 station. So we obtain different parameter. The analysis is different. this table shows the detector parameter include the back isomers and the trace velocity and amplitude and the peak rate. And we calculate the energy. The TC station, energy is about 1.23, and the energy of I-16 is about 1.58 kilotons. So we obtain the source location, use a back isomers intersection of two infrasound stations. The source location was determined is about which is only under 17 kilometers away of NASA and the location. This is my location. This is my location. This is NASA location. The conclusion is the source location and were determined by back isomers intersection of two infrasound array, and with only 17 kilometers away from NASA location. The energy of 5 bore is estimated to be about 0.4 kiloton, the average of two infrasound energy. The 5 bore event show that a large and 5 bore are easy to detect by infrasound station and are consistent with internet and media reports and US government sensor reports. They compile the data analysis of regional infrasound stations, and the IM stations is helpful to detect and locate small energy. The energy is small 1 kilotons of 5 bore events. So my presentation is over.
Thank you very much. And thank you for pointing out the importance of combining the IMS stations with local observations. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. Are there any from the audience?
Let us see. So, NASA agency used the same stations or include some others for their determination of location? Oh, yes, the energy of infrasound station and the NASA is have a different results. But I think the energy and estimate maybe have a large an error.
Any more questions? I have one question also. Have you looked at other IMS stations, or were they too far away to hope that there would be a detection there? Have you looked at other IMS stations beside I-16?
Only 60 record this event. No,
Okay.
no other
Okay,
station.
All right, thank you. Any more questions from the audience?
And was any impact on the surface in your case? No, no. The seismic station is not record any signal. The shock wave.
I see.
Right. So if there are no more questions, we'll go to the next speaker. And this is physical characterization of filters from German and Swedish radiological monitoring networks with ruthenium from 2017. And the presenter is Jan Hoffman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to my talk today. This was an interesting event that we were trying to characterize in Canada because we had a detection in the IMS of a couple treaty-relevant radionuclides, and we were trying to decide how much we could learn from it. So back in October 2017, there were several national radiation surveillance networks in Eastern and Western Europe that reported observations of ruthenium-106 and 103. And we were lucky enough to work in collaboration with our Swedish colleagues and our German colleagues because they provided us with some filter materials that we were able to do some characterization on. And we characterized these using a couple different techniques. All of these techniques that we use, though, are not techniques that are currently in the toolbox for the Ctbt purposes. But some of them are quite interesting because they are non-destructive and they provide you with valuable information. So in certain cases, it might be good to look at them as being a verification technique, and I'll talk about those in a second. So, of course, one of the things we're trying to do is characterize the ruthenium on the filters, because we're trying to understand, was there just 2 species of ruthenium on there? Were there other species of radionuclides on there? What was on these filters? And we were trying to understand the nature of the material that was on there, how did it get there, and we were trying to understand what was the state of the ruthenium at the time it was injected into the atmosphere and how it was dispersed. So in collaboration with our partners at Atomic Weapons Establishment and AWE, they did gamma ray spectroscopy on the filter. And what was different about this technique is that they used a dual gamma system. So this is a dual gamma system for coincidence spectroscopy with a cosmic veto on it. You can see the detection system right there, and they processed this to come up with a very sensitive measurement of what was on the filters. Now this only works for certain nuclides. You have to have the right sort of decay scheme. You need to have a cascade where you have a decay to an excited state before going to a ground state, and a couple things like that. But when you're able to do it, you're able to provide very detailed answers for what was on the filter. And they basically looked at the detector and they looked at the signal on each detector, and they looked at the signal combined and found that the results were relatively consistent. And then once they've done that, what they did was they basically started to look at ruthenium-106, and they looked at all the projections and combinations between the decays on the 2 detectors, and they were able to get very consistent results between different gates and different projections of the peak. And you can see the spectra right there, but it was consistent. So that gave us a very good confidence in their quantification, because this is a relatively new technique that people are just getting experience with now. A nice pretty picture of what the coincidence spectra looks like. It looks a little bit like a beta gamma spectra, but it's high resolution in both cases, so it's a lot of detail and fine structure that you need to analyze. It's a pretty picture. So, of course, for part of the analysis, we were like, okay, we've seen the ruthenium on here. What else is on here? And we looked at the Ctbt relevant list, and we decided for the ones that we could use this type of coincidence detection, could we see anything? And if not, what was our limits of detection? And in some cases, we were able to basically get down to saying things like, we couldn't see anything on here at a level below a nanobecquerel, which is an incredibly sensitive measurement. And we were basically able to say that none of these other species was present on the filter. So that told us that, one, the material in the filter was very pure. It was extremely radio pure. And the activity of the ruthenium was at least 100 to 10,000 times more than any of the other radionuclides considered. And one of the things that we were looking at was cerium-144
it also had to be at least 1,000 times less active than the released ruthenium, which we found was very interesting. So moving on to some of the work that we did at Health Canada, we decided to do some autoradiography to see what it could tell us about the material on the filter. So what you see here is a picture of a blank filter. So this is one that hasn't been exposed to air, and the sample that we got from Germany. And along with that, you can see the activity there of the ruthenium, and you can see that there's 18.7 becquerels of ruthenium on the sample filter, 11.4 becquerels of beryllium-7, and 17.2 becquerels of lead-210. Now, for autoradiography, beryllium-7 is basically transparent because it's only a gamma emitter, so it's not actually imaged. So you can kind of forget about that. And then the question becomes, well, is the activity in the filter due to the ruthenium, or is it due to the lead, or something else? And if you look at it, we started looking at some of our stuff that we had in Yellowknife, and on this graph you can see we have lead-210 characterized here, and then we have the German filter. And at comparable levels of lead-210, you can see the difference in darkness between the filters. So we were pretty confident that this was ruthenium that was causing the darkening on the filter. And not only that, it looks very uniform. And I'll show you a little bit about that in a second. These are some of the filters that we got from FOI, and they were imaged as well. A slightly different filter system, so the filters are square in this case. But you can see the activity of the ruthenium from 1 becquerel to 50 becquerel related to this incident, and you can see that it's a fairly uniform grayness no matter what concentration of ruthenium you're looking at. So what this told us was basically that the ruthenium was highly dispersed. It looks similar to lead-210. That was the only other contributor of significance to the radiograph image. But we were able to basically limit the size of the domain of the particles that were on the filter because we had done some experiments with a radioactive dispersal device in Canada. And we've also seen some autoradiographs from Takasaki after the Fukushima accident. So if you look at it from a kind of an explosive event, this might be relevant for a treaty, you kind of get images that look like this where you have a whole bunch of sort of hot particles on the filter. This looks very different than what we saw on the filter that we got from Sweden and Germany. So it looks like it's a different event, a different type of event. And we were able to characterize the particle size of it based on the image and our experience with it before. This is Takasaki, very similar as well. I'm just going to skip through this and go on to the next one because I have a lot. So basically, the Takasaki radiographs from the accident in Fukushima look very similar to our radioactive dispersal device. Basically, we concluded that the ruthenium was significantly smaller than a micron in size. So that's a very dispersed particle, and that tells you something that's interesting. It tells you that it's not necessarily from a type of explosive type accident. Health Canada, we also did some radiochemistry on it, and we did some model reactions, and we were trying to understand the species of ruthenium present. But basically, we were doing various extraction experiments and trying to react it, and we were able to conclude that about 25% of the ruthenium on the filter was ruthenium dioxide. We did some ethanol extraction and some reactivity with that, and we found that about 1 to 2% of the ruthenium was ruthenium chloride. And then we did some other stuff, and we basically were able to conclude that the remainder of the ruthenium on the filter was a myriad of species from a 7 oxidation state to a 3 oxidation state. And we found that by trying to do some solubility extraction with carbon tetrachloride or carbon tet, that there was no ruthenium tetroxide present in the filter. So we're trying to understand what was going on. Obviously, the ruthenium we concluded was highly processed. It was radio pure with multiple species present, but there was no ruthenium tetroxide. The environment wasn't right for it. The original form was not pure ruthenium dioxide. It's relatively inert. It would not have readily converted into the other groups of species that we observed on the filter. The nanoscale dispersion would have been difficult if it was in this pure form of ruthenium dioxide. And we found that we conclude that ruthenium metal would be very difficult to disperse without high temperature oxidation through ruthenium tetroxide. But because we didn't see it, we didn't conclude that there was a ruthenium metal predecessor to this. So the last kind of conclusion that we had of this is ruthenium tetroxide is a common byproduct in subsequent stages of fuel reprocessing. It's readily dispersed, and we would have had other ones present as well in the insoluble portion. So it kind of looked like it was a byproduct of fuel purification. So what does all this mean for Ctbt? Basically, we're trying to build a better verification regime, and Ctbt requires non-destructive analysis techniques. So there's a few techniques that we learned out of doing this that could be valuable for Ctbt purposes and could be adopted to help clarify the nature of some events that we see around the world. We already know that gamma-gamma coincidence provides greater sensitivity, and it also can provide greater certainty as to what you measure when you look at filters on there, relevant filters for treaty questions. And we know that autoradiography can provide exact location of particles. You could then take the specific location of a particle and, for example, put it in a well detector and measure it for much greater sensitivity. So there are some of these techniques that we might want to consider adopting as far as Ctbt. And basically, in the end, I would say that these types of techniques would provide either a stronger statement about the absence of evidence or more certainty about the evidence that you have. And in general, these support the goal that no nuclear test should go undetected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for questions. So not being an expert in radionuclide, how unusual is observation of ruthenium on IMS stations?
So that's a very good question. To my knowledge, and looking at the past historical archive of the stuff that we've analyzed at our NDC, we have never observed ruthenium before. So it was a very interesting case to look at and kind of examine as far as what it meant in terms of the treaty. And
thank you. There's one question in the back.
Thank you. You mentioned also that you had the ruthenium-103 in the sample. Were you able to take some information out of this, 103 and 106?
Yes, I didn't get into that in this talk because I had limited time, but what we managed to get out of that was a clock, and we used that to kind of date the time that the material was generated. But it was something we could talk about offline in more detail if you'd like.
Thanks, Ian, for a really interesting talk. There's clearly some other technologies that can be used in supporting the IMS. In your view, what's in the way at the moment of these things being rolled out?
Well, that's a very good question as well. I think at the moment these techniques have not really been applied yet, and I think we're just missing the operational procedures to do so and the conditions to do so within the standard operating procedures of the PTS. So, for example, if we allowed for samples to go for autoradiography, we could do that. The equipment's not expensive. It's relatively straightforward to do. It's non-destructive. We just need to make the usage case for it.
We'll give you a microphone.
Do you consider of source ruthenium and location this source?
Not in this talk, no.
Okay, so we're a little bit in advance still. There's time for one more question, if anybody has a question. Okay. If not, then we'll go to the next talk, which is possibilities to identify cavity due to underground nuclear explosion using seismic wave fields. And this is given by Josef Christek.
Good afternoon. I will present the results of our joint work with, in our Bratislava group together with CTBTO organization. So, yes. So what was the motivation for this work? In collaboration with CTBTO to investigate possibilities of the resonance seismometry for the on-site inspection using 3D modeling of seismic wave fields in realistic models of underground structure after an underground nuclear explosion. So first we had to construct a set of realistic models. So we perform in-depth literature survey, and we end up with two kinds of models. First model is the model with cavity with some crashed zone and elastic zone of inelastic deformation, and the other kind of the models are models where the cavity and the chimney is filled with rubble and the top is apical void. So we assumed 4 essential types of pre-shot media. It's tuff, alluvium, rock salt, and granite. All these pre-shot media was considered as a viscoelastic media with some moderate attenuation. 2 different yields of explosion, low yield 1 kiloton, high yield 10 kiloton. 2 different depth of burial, minimum depth of burial, and 2 times this minimal depth, which we called the deeper or deep depth of burial. And we also considered 3 different fillings of cavity or apical void. So the fillings could be either fluid or gas, so it means low or high P-wave velocity or vacuum. So in total, we had 48 basic structural models. They differ in radius. So for example, radius of cavity was from 10 to 33 meters, and the height of chimney was from 62 up to 250 meters. The numerical simulations were performed used by internationally verified 3D finite difference modeling code based on 4th order accurate in space and 2nd order accurate in time heterogeneous finite difference scheme on staggered grid. And we had to incorporate also a novel approach to simulate vacuum cavities, and this had to be verified, so we performed verification test on 2 models. The first model was model vacuum cavity in a homogeneous Hall space. So we checked our simulation with finite element, independent finite element simulation, and you can see on the bottom left part that our simulation finite difference in black, finite elements in red, and a very good agreement. So we can conclude that all finite difference, finite element comparisons lead to conclusion that our FD modeling is well applicable to numerical modeling of seismic wave propagation in media with vacuum cavities. The next verification test was fluid filled cavity in a homogeneous unbounded medium. As a reference, we used the solution performed by Sophie Esterhazy using a discontinuous Galerkin spectral element method. This is in blue in top panels. The seismic traces, our traces are in black, so you can see the nice comparison, and also a very good comparison, very similar results are obtained for, as if we plot snapshots in different times. So we can also conclude that the comparison with the independent method leads to conclusion that our FD modeling is applicable to fluid-filled cavities. We excited the wave field by different excitations. In the first kind, there was 3 types of plane waves, 1 P wave, 2 S waves with orthogonal polarities. And these types of excitation enable to compute metrics of the Fourier transfer functions of the medium. Another kind was the point source representing an aftershock. So for assumed yields, aftershock will have magnitudes around -1. And we also assumed a random distribution of parameters of focal mechanism, strike, dip, and rake. And the last wave field excitation was ambient noise. So we randomly generated point sources at the free surface as a body forces with random space-time distribution, random time functions, orientations. So we simulated something like ambient seismic noise. We used a uniform dense grid of receivers at the free surface, which covers area roughly 800 times 800 meters with interstation distance of 10 meters, centered around the cavity projected on the free surface. So in total, 6,400 receivers. Frequency range was up to 220 hertz and time windows at least 30 seconds. So we can go to results. So first, we investigated the effects of cavity and apical void filling. So here we see the time frequency representations of horizontal component for the model without chimney, so in the rock salt. And here we see three different kinds of cavity fillings: fluid at the top, gas at the middle, and vacuum at the bottom. And in order to better see the coda part, where the resonances should be clearly visible, we performed this test on elastic models. So we clearly see that different fillings affects mainly the frequencies that are enhanced, but overall pattern is almost the same. The same results we can see for the models with Chimney. For example, this is TUF model in TUF. And we can conclude that the differences are visible but not significant. The overall character of time frequency representation is basically the same, and the time frequency representations mainly differ in frequencies that are enhanced. The differences due to the type of filling are better visible in the models without Chimney. Next, we evaluated the effects of attenuation. So here we have the vacuum filled model with Chimney. This is TUF model, so the model with Chimney. We see here time frequency representation on the horizontal component. At the top is the elastic model, and then from the top to bottom, we have models with low to high attenuation. In this figure, we see the vertical component, and on the bottom, we see the results for the models without Chimney in the rock salt. In all cases, we see that the attenuation mainly affects the coda part of the seismograms, and it suppresses mainly the higher frequencies. So we can conclude that the attenuation mainly affects the coda of seismograms. Higher frequencies are more attenuated. Then we tried to simulate something which is realistic. So we tried to simulate something like regional or distant seismic sources. And for this, we convolved our synthetic matrix Fourier transfer functions with real, it means recorded accelegrams. This, we selected 5 accelegrams differing in magnitude from 4.6 up to 6.5, differing in the epicentral distance from 2 to 20 kilometers, and mainly differing in spectral contents. You see on the right-hand side, there is a normalized power spectral density. You don't see the horizontal frequency range, but it is from 0 to 26 hertz. So they differ considerably. And for each of these simulations, we plotted something we call the median frequency. So we plotted such nice plots where the horizontal plane is the plane of receivers, our dense array, and this Z value is median frequency. Median frequency is a frequency which divides the energy contents in a spectrum into two same parts. So it means 50-50. So in fact, it is spectral edge frequency 50%. We can also construct spectral edge frequency, let's say 70%, when the energy is divided in 70 to 30%. So we plotted such figures for horizontal components for all 5 recordings, for all 5 simulated realistic seismograms, also for vertical, and also we plotted the ratio of this horizontal over vertical median frequency, and we see that in all cases we can clearly see the pattern which clearly indicates the position of the cavity. So the same results we obtained for models which are with Chimney, without Chimney, and also for deeper models. Yeah, in all cases, in all the figures demonstrate that it should be possible to identify and locate surface position of cavity from spectral edge frequencies evaluated for a sufficient set of seismic records of regional distance earthquakes. We try to use the same techniques for the weak local aftershocks. We modeled several different focal mechanisms, but these data are too much affected. I will not show it here. I just quickly going to results, to summary, that the seismic wave field due to a near aftershock is too much affected or dominated by radiation pattern of the source, and this makes the identification of cavity signatures very difficult from records of a single aftershocks. And the last part, we analyzed the simulated ambient noise, but due to the large computational requirements, one numerical simulation of seismic noise provided maximum 4.5 minutes of noise. This is still not enough because in practice, we use several tens of minutes or even longer of seismic records of noise. Therefore, we try to estimate whether there is any hidden information about cavity position in the spectrum that could be extracted if sufficiently long noise records were available. Therefore, we calculated, we call this quantity relative power, which is power evaluated from the difference between complex Fourier spectra, evaluated for noise, seismic noise in UNE altered medium, minus seismic noise in original, so before UNE homogeneous Hall space. So here we plotted this relative power for the model with Chimney, for the minimum DOB, depth of burial. On the top we have horizontal component, on the bottom vertical component, and two different fillings, fluid field, vacuum field. We see clearly that there is some information about position of the cavity because cavity is in the middle of the picture. And if we use the model which is deep, which has a deep position of the cavity, the results are not so nice because you don't see the scale, but the scale here is almost 10 times larger smaller than in the previous case. So it's hard to say whether we could see something if the model is very deep. The same results well for rock salt. So we can conclude that the results indicate that the UNE altered medium has an effect on the noise spectral contents, but the effect vanishes with a very large DOB. So, conclusions. We have developed a set of realistic structural models of the underground structure after an UNE explosion. We performed an extensive numerical simulations of seismic wave field due to plane wave, double Kappa sources, random ambient noise using forward 3D finite difference modeling. Time frequency representations and Fourier transfer functions thought having similar patterns for different models indicate various specific frequencies at which seismic motion is excited or amplified due to different model parameters. We showed that the characteristics of spectral edge frequency provide a robust tool for identification and redistribution of energy in the spectral domain as a function of spatial position of a seismometer and can be used to identify cavity position. And the potential to identify cavity position is considerably larger for regional distance sources than for local aftershocks. And our simulation and analysis of seismic noise indicate possibility to use for identification of cavity position, also records of seismic noise. Thank you for your attention.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Thank you for a nice talk. My name's Anton Tchaikovsky from Edinburgh University. I just want to understand the geometry of your receivers. So I think you said it was 800 meters by 800 meters, right? And they are right on top of the cavity. Is
yes.
that right? Right.
Yes, they are spanning the area around the cavity, yes.
Okay, and then the source that you're using for your seismic signal can be an earthquake somewhere else, but you're not bringing an artificial source.
We used either plane wave excitation, which is somehow correlated, or which should be some approximation of distant sources. We have plane wave coming from the bottom. We also simulated buoyant double Kaplan sources very close to the cavity as an aftershock, as a potential aftershocks, and we simulated seismic noise. Yeah.
Okay, but the thing that strikes me is that your array of receivers is right on top of this cavity. So first of all, you have to find where that place is before you can do the experiment. Is that right?
Yes, yes, of course.
And how do you do that?
Yes, this was our because we performed only numerical simulations, we can place the receivers everywhere we want. So we span area with 6,400 receivers just in order to see where is the cavity. So we can have this privilege to cover the area very dense, but we also know that in reality it's not possible. But without this information, what is possible if we would have very dense array, we cannot make any conclusions. So we just cover the area of 1 square kilometers. Okay, we put it the cavity, the position of the cavity at the middle, yeah, at the center, but doesn't matter. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rob Miller's Livermore Lab. Suppose there was a low velocity shallow layer of damage, perhaps due to spall above it.
Yes.
Could that cause difficulty in interpreting results? Have you tried anything like that?
We didn't try yet this. We plan to do this as a next step. But yeah, it depends on the S-wave velocity, on the thickness of this layer. If it is very, very thin layer, let's say a few meters, it will affect only very large frequencies, I guess. So hard to say. And if this layer is really homogeneous, then it couldn't be so big problem. But we should check this, of course.
One more question.
Hi, I'm Chai. Thank you very, very much for the nice talk. What I want to understand, probably you said it, but you took a homogeneous block without velocity layers.
Yes.
So it's homogeneous, no.
Yes, the pre-shot medium was homogeneous Hall space.
Did you try to do any random?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay, so I think we should go to our next talk now. And our next talk is by Celso Avorazzi. And the title is Full Moment Tensor Analysis of Nuclear Explosions and a Collapse in North Korea.
How can I in this stuff answer? Okay, thanks. Good afternoon. My name is Celso de Alvizuri. The title of my presentation is Full Moment Tensor Analysis of Nuclear Explosions and a Collapse in North Korea. To motivate my work, I'd like to show this figure. Our main goal, perhaps my goal and also the goal of the Ctbt, it turns out, is to differentiate and classify different seismic events. So usually we're faced with the task of we have an observation at the surface, and our task is to decode what generated that signal, perhaps a volcanic eruption, perhaps activity in the magma chamber. We can have the good old classical earthquake, perhaps machinery, nuclear tests, mine collapses, or other activities at the surface, for example, a mine blast, accidents, and so on. To figure out to get at the source of what happened, to get at what happened at the source, I used the seismic moment tensors. So a seismic moment tensor is a representation of an earthquake. The moment tensor can be represented in terms of an orientation matrix U, a moment tensor, and a moment tensor, an eigenvalues, and an eigenvalue matrix, sorry. So the eigenvalues, they're important because they determine the shape of the beach ball. So these are the eigenvalues, and they determine the shading and the coloring on the beach ball. The eigenvalues can also be organized on the surface of a sphere or on a loon. That's this brown area. And this figure shows a range of moment tensors together with the corresponding beach balls and where they fall on the loon. For example, you can have, it's hard to see with the pointer, but we can have positive isotropic eigenvalues. They correspond to this beach ball that is color black. We can have, yes, thanks. Yes, we can have a moment tensor with negative eigenvalues. They correspond to an imploding, or well, if it's interpreted, they can correspond to, excuse me, to a negative isotropic. So the positive isotropic moment tensors, they fall in this region of the loon. The negative isotropic moment tensors, they fall in the bottom part of the loon. Then there are the double couples, and with their many orientations, they plot at a center of the loon. There are the CLVDs, they plot along this axis. So the horizontal axis here is the CLVD, the vertical axis is the isotropic. In my work, I use a geometric parameterization for moment tensors. That means the moment tensor can be represented in terms of gamma and delta, which describe the location on the loon. So the gamma delta determine the location here. The kappa sigma theta, they determine the orientation of the beach ball. And I also look for the magnitude. So the goal in this work is to find a moment tensor that best fits the observations and to estimate the moment tensor uncertainties. And for that, I worked on a grid search that does a search through the entire full moment tensor space. And this led to this publication. This is an algorithm to estimate full moment tensors plus uncertainties. This was published in 2017. And there are two main parts to this algorithm. One is moment tensor estimation, another one is the uncertainty estimation. The moment tensor estimation performs an efficient grid search over the full moment tensor space. It performs basically a grid search over the 5D space. For any given event, the algorithm evaluates over 30 million solutions. For each solution, it computes a synthetic seismograms, and it compares them through a misfit function with the observed seismograms. This is not automated, so it takes some time and fine-tuning of parameters to arrive at a good solution. The uncertainty portion of the estimation, a key part here is that it relies on having a homogeneous distribution of solution of moment tensors. Then the method performs an assessment over the full ensemble of moment tensors evaluated during the grid search. It finds the best fitting orientation at each point on the loon, and it derives parameters of confidence for moment tensors and parameters of a probability for source types. When it's all said and done, this is an example result. This is an analysis for an earthquake in Oklahoma. This is the optimal moment tensor. The crosses are station locations on the focal sphere. This is for an event in 2016 in Pawnee, Oklahoma. I'm not showing all the stations that I used for this particular analysis, but I used 22 stations. I'm only showing 4 stations here. That's this here. This is the station. For this analysis, I use vertical, radial, and transverse component surface waves. I filter these between 10 and 50 seconds. The black wiggles are the observed, the red are the synthetic, and for this analysis, I used a model of the central US. And this is a moment tensor analysis, an uncertainty analysis, and I would like to spend a few moments to describe this figure because I will show it again in my later analysis. So first is the station map. The circles are the station locations. Circles and squares are station locations. The circles are colored depending on the observation of first motion polarity at that station. So if there's first motion was up, it's colored blue. If the first motion is down, it's colored white. It turns out that the distribution of stations and the distribution of polarities around the focal sphere, it also determines the range of solutions that can be analyzed on the Loon. And that's shown here in this plot. So blue means the regions, a region of solutions where all first motion polarities agree with the observations. Then I show a probability density function here that shows a density of similar fitting solutions. As I mentioned earlier, the double couple is at the center. These two plots, the rectangle and the Loon, they're equivalent through a transformation. The Loon represents source types on the surface of a sphere. The rectangle represents a homogeneous distribution of source types on a rectangle. The algorithm also calculates confidence parameters. Finally, the waveform fit plot, it shows the regions of similar fitting solutions. So the optimal solution is here, but there's also a range of similar fitting solutions around the double couple. So I applied this methodology to the events in North Korea. This is a press statement released by the Ctbt on September 3, 2017. Our monitoring stations picked up an unusual seismic event in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea today at 3:30 UTC, and they also released this figure that shows the evolution of the nuclear program, I suppose, for North Korea, starting from the event in 2006 up to 2009, all the way to 2017. So this prompted me to look into these events and to analyze their seismic sources using the methodology that I described earlier. And this led to the following paper. This is a study that was published in 2018 in the SRL special issue. For this analysis, I analyzed 6 nuclear tests, 1 unusual event after the last nuclear test. I analyzed 2 earthquakes in South Korea, and I used all available open broadband stations within a 2,000-kilometer radius. So here's a station map that shows the location of the nuclear tests, the location of the earthquakes. The triangles are the stations that I use in my analysis. And the picture to the right shows a zoom in of the nuclear test facility and the location of the estimated location of the events from event number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to another event after the last nuclear test. Here's a result that shows the analysis for the main event. This is for the last declared nuclear test. This is an event on 2017 on 903 at 3:30 UTC. Here's the optimal fitting solution. Again, I'm not showing all, I don't have enough space to show all the stations that I use, but I used a total of 34 stations. I use vertical, radial, and transverse surface waves. Black is the observed, the red is the synthetic. Here's the station map showing the stations that I use for this analysis and also the polarities. Here are the solutions permissible according to the polarities. The probability density function shows that there is a high density of similar fitting solutions in the positive isotropic region. This is the waveform fit. This is the optimal moment tensor in the positive isotropic region. Here's an enlarged version that's showing also the station distribution. 8 minutes after this event, there was another smaller event. I also analyzed that. And this is the result. This was at 3:38 UTC. This is the optimal solution. It plots in the negative isotropic region. The black is observed, the red is a synthetic. This was a slightly noisier event. I used vertical and radial component surface waves. I didn't use transverse component waves, surface waves. This is the station configuration, and this plot shows a high density of similar fitting solutions in the negative isotropic region. Right, and this is a waveform fit plot, oops, sorry. Yes, this is again the waveform fit plot that shows the location of the optimal solution. Together with these events, I also analyzed earthquakes in Korea to see the capability of the methodology in being able to differentiate different types of events. Here's an example result. This is an earthquake in 2017, 11/15 in Pohang. Here's the optimal fitting. This is the best fitting solution. I use vertical, radial, and transverse component surface waves, filtered between 20 to 50 seconds. Here's the station map showing the stations used in this analysis. And this event is unusual. The optimal fitting solution is very close to the positive, it's very close to the double couple. But when you look at the uncertainties, here in the probability density function and in the Loon plot, it shows that there is a range of similar fitting solutions, perhaps towards the negative isotropic region. So there seems to be some trade-off. This event turns out to be a complicated event. This is perhaps related to enhanced geothermal activities. And some people think that it's possible that there were multiple events that activated almost simultaneously. So perhaps what we're seeing is the signal of two almost perhaps collocated, considering the frequencies analyzed here. So perhaps the trade-offs that we're seeing here is the result of multiple simultaneous events. This figure summarizes all the events that I analyzed in this study. It shows the evolution of the declared nuclear test from number 1, 2, 3, up to magnitude 6. This is the best fitting solution. This is, again, the waveform fit plot, and these are the probability density functions. Then I analyzed the event after the last nuclear test. It falls in the negative isotropic region. This is an earthquake that I analyzed. I didn't discuss it, but the best fitting solution, it's almost a bullseye near the double couple. And this is the last event that I discussed, the Pohang event. Another result that came out from this analysis is that when you look at the optimal solution here, in this case, they all fall in this region of the Loon. When you look at the optimal solution, well, it turns out that the radiation pattern doesn't necessarily appear to be a perfect sphere. Rather, it looks like this. So on the top row, I show ellipsoids or isocontours around the optimal moment tensor obtained from the analysis that I showed. And they're not perfectly spherical. They actually look elongated. Many people in the literature, depending who you ask in the seismology community, there are many ways to decompose a moment tensor. For this analysis, I decided to decompose these moment tensors in terms of a crack and a double couple. When you remove the double couple, this is what remains, a crack. And so what's interesting is that all of these cracks, they tend to show their p-axis aligned almost vertically. So this is the horizontal plane. The gray is the horizontal plane. And perhaps somebody in the audience has some suggestions of what might give rise to these non-isotropic radiation patterns. And then some perspectives. I discuss uncertainties. I discuss some trade-offs that comes when we analyze the moment tensor, not as a point source, but also together with the trade-offs in our ability to resolve different components of the moment tensor. Perhaps these trade-offs come from structure. Perhaps they come from noise, or perhaps limitations from the models that we use. So uncertainties are essential for discussion of physical processes. I apply this methodology to many different settings: explosions, collapses, volcanic events. I'm also applying the methodology to landslides. So in conclusion, I presented a methodology to estimate seismic moment tensors together with uncertainties. I showed some results where I applied the methodology to events in North and South Korea that show the progression of the nuclear tests from the first to the sixth event. I showed a collapse 8 minutes after the last event. Ongoing feature work includes analysis of landslides, moment tensor uncertainties using 3D-dimensional models of the structure, and physical modeling of the seismic sources. This figure shows a catalog of solutions, and it shows nicely that if we consider just our best fitting solution for each one of these events, they differentiate nicely on the Lund. So the green triangles here, they are all results from nuclear tests. These are also these results also show another results from another analysis that I did for nuclear tests at the Nevada test site. The squares are here, and they represent collapses. The black circles represent moment tensor solutions for events that are deemed to be tectonic, and the red represents solutions in a volcanic region. In volcanic regions, they tend to produce much more exotic volcanic sources beyond just double couples. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
What was the distance between your station and explosion in kilometers?
Oh, I'm sorry, can you go back to the, I don't remember off the top of my head, but can you go back to the? So you're asking for the distance from the nearest station?
Yes.
So that would be station for this event. This is ordered by station distance. Oh, sorry. This is ordered by station distance. So the first station is SEHB at distance 346 kilometers.
Oh my God. And time you got a sign?
I'm sorry?
Time.
What about the time?
Time when explosion, and you got a sign in your spectrometer. Because explosion you need to detect. So your explosion is a little bit before you get detection.
Right. There is an offset. So I guess I'm not sure I understand the question, but yes, there is a lag from the moment the event occurred.
We can take one more question. Okay, we'll take you next.
Okay, sir. Are there trade-off between the magnitude and the 6 moment tensor elements? Are there trade-off between the magnitude or MW and the 6 moment tensors?
So I think the question is there a trade-off between the moment tensor elements and the magnitude of the event?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but so if you consider, for example, you have a radiation pattern, a particular radiation pattern, you go from one magnitude to the next one, you're just increasing in a way, you're just increasing the size of the radiation pattern. So I'm not sure why we would expect to see a trade-off.
So in the Lund map, you give the magnitude. Okay. In the Lund map, you give.
Oops.
Yeah, the magnitude is a fixed value. Is the best
yes.
fixed value or a variable value?
Yes, the grid search includes a magnitude search. So the magnitude estimates that I showed, they are the result of the optimal magnitude from a grid search of the magnitude.
So since this is the last session here, we'll take your question.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting talk. On some of your slides for the analysis of the DPRK tests, I'm not sure, it looked like you might have a depth value for the your reconstruction. Is that correct? And if so, what sort of depths were you reconstructing?
No, I did not attempt to make an estimate of the depth. So all the depths that I use for the nuclear test estimates are 1 kilometer depth.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one more question.
maybe small question. Thank you for very interesting presentation. And my question about collapse events. Is it possible from your analysis to get some parameters of collapse, the size?
So the question is it possible to get a collapse component in the moment tensor?
But about size of how long the collapse, how not?
I will have to think about it, but I guess it depends also how you decide to decompose the moment tensor. So I showed a particular decomposition where you can always perhaps come up with a decomposition in terms of an isotropic component, a double couple component, perhaps a smaller. So I don't have the results to show that.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. This concludes our session. And right after this, we have the poster preview. So we have a pretty large number of previews that were given to the operators. What I would suggest is that the preview presenters line up along this wall to my right over here. And we'll go in the order of the poster number. So starting with P1 and P11, 12, 13, and so on. So increasing number of the poster number. And we'll start with a P1 poster.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being here today. I'd like to kind of review actually the poster that I presented over the past 2 days. So this is about a seismoacoustic analysis of the 2017 North Korean nuclear test and the use of microbarometer arrays in the characterization of seismoacoustic coupling. So as we know, the underground tests and earthquakes don't only produce seismic waves, but they also produce infrasonic waves into the atmosphere. And we can learn a lot about the coupling by studying the coherent infrasonic waves that are recorded on IMS arrays. In this case, we analyzed the coupling from the 2017 nuclear tests on IMS array IS-45, and we applied array processing and back projection techniques to identify which regions led to coupling into the atmosphere. So this is done in different frequency bands, as you can see on the slide. To the left is a back projection.
That's all right.
Thank you.
So you have 1 minute. There should be 11. Is 11 here? 11? Okay, so we need a 13.
12.
Next.
12.
Oh, sorry.
One
12.
more.
You're 12.
You're 12? Yeah.
12.
Oh, 12. I'm sorry. 12 is here.
So 1 minute?
1 minute.
Yes. So we try to set to determine magnitude, classical body wave magnitude for the 6 nuclear tests done in North Korea, especially the latest one in 2017 had a large scatter among the reported values, ranging from 5.7 to 6.3. So we would try to see why that happens. And so intermediate results, you can see from the figure that we found out that there are some global regional pattern of magnitude higher than average values, network average. That's a red one on IMS array here. And the blue ones are the ones which arrays and networks stations, which shows smaller value than network average. So that looks like sort of not site response alone. It looks like a global regional pattern. So please come and see the poster. Thank you.
Hi, Jesse sends his apologies. He couldn't be here today. His poster is on the Nevada National Security Site, which formerly the Nevada Test Site, and we're doing some long-range programs there relative to non-proliferation. Specifically, the poster discusses the UNESI, which is the Underground Nuclear Explosion Signatures Experiment, and then a program I was on, which is a source physics experiment, SPE, the last test of which was this past Saturday. You're welcome to come by and see the poster, and I'll be standing by it for you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jung-Hyun Park from Southern Methodist University. So we assessed the infrasound. Oh, this is not.
We need the 13. Okay.
No, I'm 16. Yeah, this
16,
is mine.
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, so we assessed the infrasound signals from the 2017 North Korean underground nuclear explosion and subsequent collapse event. So we have really good detection. As you can see here, multiple infrasound signals from explosion are well recorded at 8 regional infrasound signal arrays in South Korea, as well as the IMS infrasound stations in Russia. And while the collapse signals are recorded only 5 closure arrays. So to predict these kinds of arrivals, we approached 3 different methods, like backward, forward ray tracing, and in model inversion using current available global model. So you can see the figures that ray tracing is just cover the IT predictions, and it is not consistent with our observation in terms of arrival and amplitude. So, and also this explosion happened in a equinox period when the stratospheric wind is very weak. So it is very challenging to interpret these kinds of arrivals using based on our current model. So we need to have more detailed version or small structure of atmospheric model. Thank you.
So hello, we present by the poster the overview of North Korean nuclear tests based on the data from the Slovak National Network of seismic stations. From the 6 events, 5 were detected, so the signal is very clear, but in the first, in 2006, is somewhere hidden in the seismic noise, so there's some other analysis needs to be done. And what is maybe interesting that the body wave magnitude determined by the Slovak National Network is systematically higher than in comparison to USGS or and this, I mean the National Data Center, I mean the Ctbt magnitude. Thank you.
What number?
Yeah, that's it. Hello, my name is Tom Vandermark. I work at the US NDC. So our poster is all about relative location of the DPRK test events. So we used a regional data set of IMS and IRIS open stations for the results. So the blue icons are basically the locations that came from the map that was presented to the press last year in May. And then the yellow icons are our geolocations from this analysis. So the motivation of this work is now that we have this extra information that was presented to us by the North Koreans, even though we kind of question how precise those locations may be, we have this orthogonal information that we can use to validate our relative location procedure going forward, so we can deliver results to our various customers in a timely fashion if the need ever rises again. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jesse. I'm with the Australian NDC. I've written a very simple relative locations code based on station terms, not double difference. And I've applied it to the North Korean nuclear tests, and the results are reasonably comparable with what's been published. So going forward, I'd quite like to turn this code into, it already works with GeoTool, but I'd like to create a GUI around it to make it so the analysts could use it if they're interested. And so if you're interested in relative locations, I'd like to hear from you. So come see my poster. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brasnevi Manzunzu from the Council for Geoscience in South Africa. We looked at the relocated the events, seismic events from the South African region to identify ground truth events for the regional telesseismic model, for the global 3D model. And we identified 8 events that suit the criteria by Bonda for the GT identification, and from the 8, 2 of them qualified for GT5 at 95% level. If you're interested in understanding more, you can visit my poster. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Juarez, and in my poster, I'm presenting the work that I'm doing with Tom Jordan at the University of Southern California. We are presenting a new mathematical description of the complexity of seismic sources, such as earthquakes and explosions. In our representation, we improve the point source approximation, and also we quantify the source complexity. In this figure that I'm showing is an example of the the composition of the moment density generated by an explosion model. And it turns out that the dimensionality of this model is about 4. But if you want to know more, please come to talk to me or watch my poster. Thank you.
안녕하십니까. 오늘 저는
It's not my poster. Thank you. My name's Anton Tchaikovsky. I'm interested in understanding the North Korean nuclear explosions as seismic sources. I use spectral ratios of seismograms to eliminate path effects between the North Korean test site and the seismic station. The spectral ratio is then the ratio of the spectra of the 2 seismic source time functions. I find synthetic source time functions that have the best fitting spectral ratio. Only a few parameters are necessary. What comes out of it is synthetic source time functions which are damped sine waves, the elastic radii, Poisson's ratio, and then you can test these source time functions by deconvolving the seismograms that they came from to see what the Green's functions are, and the Green's function should be the same for all sources to the same receiver. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rong Song-ji from the State Department of the United States. Over the past 7 years, we held 6 workshops in East Asia, about 10 to 12 countries, NDCs actually. With the IDC, we got together to share the data, and the PTS picked a common event for the participant to exercise. Basically, every NDC would do their own analysis and then come to the workshop to share the result. And in addition, the goal of this workshop is to facilitate the cooperative dialogues about the sharing data on a case-by-case basis. And one highlight that our colleague Martin Kalinowski would say is that in this workshop, we try to have the synergy between the waveform side and also the radionuclide side, looking at the same event. Of course, over the years, we noticed that the participants have improved their analytical tools, such as cross-correlation, relative location techniques, and so on. So in a forum to share the data, that's successful. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. This poster describes work that was done at the Nevada National Security Site, measuring concentrations of radon gas in the subsurface for a period of time surrounding the dry alluvium geology experiment, which was essentially a series of large explosive shots done sequentially in the same borehole at various depths. So the goal of this was to see whether increased radon concentrations could be indicative of an underground nuclear explosion. And as you can see from this plot shown here, that we did see some fairly large increases in radon concentration after the explosions. But if you come by the poster, you'll be able to see that there's some complicating factors that we'll discuss. Thanks.
Hello, my
My name is Claire Perry, and I'm with the Canadian Hazards Information Service in Ottawa, Canadian Data Center. So I'm presenting this poster on behalf of my colleague, Nick Ackerley. So here we're looking at a suite of low magnitude earthquakes in eastern North America, and looking to improve on ground truth events in the area. So Nick has been in contact from about 2016 onward with the mining operators, been getting confirmed depths and exact locations of these rock bursts in the area, and he's then using this information to test regional depth phase modeling techniques and getting some pretty nice results. So please come by the poster if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the preview presenters. I suggest we give them another hand. And I encourage you to go and talk to them and view their posters. And this concludes the session for today. Thank you very much.